Welcome to the Fogwood Files, where fog lingers among the trees and the forest holds its secrets close. The Canadian Maritimes are a land of silence and shadow, where paths dissolve into mist and voices echo without a source. Here, beneath the canopy of pines, people have witnessed things they cannot explain. Their words remain as fragments of a larger mystery, stories carried through the woods like whispers in the dark. Tonight, we open one of those accounts and step deeper into the ledger of the strange.
Case File 002, Dogman Encounter, rural New Brunswick. Date of encounter, March 2011. Location, gas station, northern New Brunswick. Report submitted, January 2023.
I was 29 when it happened. At the time, I wasn't exactly living the kind of life I'd pictured for myself. I'd bounced from job to job since high school. A little construction here, some warehouse work there, but nothing ever seemed to stick. Bills piled up faster than paychecks, and by the fall of 2007, I was desperate to keep a roof over my head. That's how I ended up working the overnight shift at a gas station in northern New Brunswick. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The manager told me all I had to do was keep the lights on, stock the shelves, and handle the odd late-night customer. He even joked that the biggest danger I'd face was boredom. At the time, I believed him. The truth is, part of me didn't mind the solitude. Nights were quiet, predictable. I liked the hum of the coolers, the steady tick of the clock on the wall, the way the fluorescent lights made the world outside look like it had been erased. After years of noise and chaos, the stillness felt like relief. The station itself sat on the edge of town, just far enough down the highway that traffic thinned after dark. Beyond the pumps and the glow of the sign was nothing but endless forest, black spruce, jack pine, cedar. Thick woods that seemed to lean in closer when the fog rolled off the river. Growing up in New Brunswick, I'd heard all the usual stories about the woods: black bears, coyotes, the occasional cougar. My grandfather used to warn me that the forest had old things in it, things best left alone. I always chalked it up to campfire talk, the kind of tales people swap to scare kids into coming home before dark. At 29, I didn't put much stock in folklore, but I learned quickly that solitude isn't always peaceful, and silence isn't always empty. The first week on the job was uneventful, almost dull. A couple of truckers passing through, a college kid buying cigarettes, the occasional drunk staggering in after the bars closed. Mostly it was just me, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, and the endless dark pressing against the glass. It was October, the kind of month when the nights come early and last forever. By midnight, the fog would settle low along the highway, swallowing the tree line until it looked like the forest had crept closer to the station. I started keeping the radio on just to cut the silence. It was on the fourth night that I noticed something different. I'd been restocking the chip rack when I realized the usual background sounds had gone quiet. No cars on the highway, no insects buzzing against the glass, no wind against the siding, just silence. The kind that doesn't feel like peace, but pressure. Heavy. Waiting. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Nights come quiet in the Maritimes. But when I stepped outside to empty the trash, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The fog hung thick around the tree line, and the forest felt still. Not resting, but holding its breath. On the fifth night, the unease grew. Around 2 a.m., while making my rounds, I heard something tap the glass at the front of the store. A single, sharp tick against the window. I froze. It wasn't the soft flutter of a moth or the scrape of a branch. It was deliberate. I shone my flashlight through the glass, but the fog outside only reflected my own pale face staring back. When I stepped out under the canopy, the air smelled strange. Damp earth mixed with something rank, like wet fur left too long in the sun. I circled the lot, but found nothing. No car, no animal, no sign of what had made the sound. Still, when I went back inside, the smell seemed to cling to me, riding in on my clothes. By the seventh night, things escalated. Just past 3, while I was mopping the floor, I heard what I thought was gravel shifting outside near the pumps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, heavy enough that they crunched against the frost. I rushed to the window, expecting a late-night driver pulling in, but the lot was empty. That was the first time I felt it. The certainty that I wasn't alone, that something was moving just beyond the edge of the lights, careful to stay hidden in the fog. And from that night on, the woods around the station never felt the same. Once the silence started, it never really left. Each night carried something new, as if whatever was out there was testing the edges, learning how close it could come. On October 10th, just after 2 in the morning, I heard the first knock. 3 hard raps on the side wall of the building, the one that faced the woods. They weren't the random thuds of a loose shutter or the wind rattling metal. They were deliberate. I froze behind the counter, every hair on my arms standing on end. I forced myself to step outside, flashlight trembling in my hand, but the beam only cut through fog and empty asphalt. When I circled to the far wall, the siding was damp with condensation, and 3 wet smears ran across it, wide as a man's hand, but ending in points like claws. October 11th, something worse. Around midnight, I caught motion on the security monitor, a dark shape at the farthest edge of the lot, tall, upright, moving in a slow arc toward the pumps. I watched, frozen, as it reached the circle of light, and then was gone. The camera cut to static for a second, and when it cleared, the lot was empty again. I replayed it 3 times, but there was nothing left on the tape. Just interference, as if the thing had somehow wiped itself from the recording. October 12th brought sounds I can still hear in my sleep. At 3:30 a.m., a low howl rose from the tree line, long and guttural, carrying more weight than any coyote or wolf I'd ever heard. It vibrated in my chest, shaking the glass panes in the door. What froze me wasn't just the sound itself, but the silence that followed. No crickets, no wind. Even the hum of the coolers seemed to fade, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The next night, October 13th, it got bolder. I was restocking the cooler in the back when I heard a heavy dragging sound along the outside wall. Something long and sharp scraping slowly against the siding, traveling the length of the building. I dropped the crate and rushed to the front counter. The scraping stopped. I waited, sweat running down my back, until finally I forced myself to open the door and step out under the canopy. Nothing moved. The fog was thick enough to taste, and yet I felt eyes on me from somewhere inside it. By October 14th, I was barely sleeping. Coffee kept me upright, but paranoia kept me alert. That night, I caught another glimpse. A silhouette in the fog, across the Tulane highway that passed the station. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a narrow waist. Upright, it stood between the pines for what felt like minutes, just at the edge of visibility, then melted backward into the mist. I knew then it wasn't an animal. Animals don't watch. Animals don't wait. On October 15th, the escalation felt almost theatrical. Around 4 a.m., something began rapping on the pump nozzles, a measured, hollow knocking that rang out across the asphalt. It started slow, 1 knock, then a pause, then 3 in quick succession, like a pattern someone else might follow. I grabbed a flashlight and ran the length of the lot, sweeping the light over metal and snow, but there was nothing. No prints, No smear, no sign of someone having been there. The sound had come from nowhere and gone the same way, leaving only the echo in my ears and a prickling at the base of my skull. The next night, October 16th, the station felt invaded in a different way. Just after 2 a.m., the fluorescent lights inside began to flicker in sequence, front to back, as if something were walking the length of the building and the bulbs were reacting to its presence. Each time the last light near the office guttered, I braced for the door to rattle, but nothing touched it. Then, just as quickly, the lights steadied, leaving the place in its usual pale glow. I sat frozen at the counter, ears straining, and heard it, a slow, deliberate breathing pressed against the outside glass, deep enough to fog the pain, though no shape appeared in the light. When I finally gathered the nerve to check, the glass was clean and dry, as if nothing had been there at all. By then, I knew it wasn't just passing through. It was circling closer, waiting, and each night it stayed longer, pressing in tighter, like the station was no longer a safe haven, but a cage it was testing for weaknesses. By October 17th, the tension had become unbearable. Every night felt like standing at the edge of something vast, waiting for it to finally reach up and pull me under. That night began quiet, too quiet. Around 1:30 a.m., the traffic on the highway thinned to nothing, and the fog rolled in heavy, pressing against the windows like a living thing. I tried to distract myself by mopping the floor, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was certainty. At 2:12 a.m., the sound started again. Not a howl this time, but a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate straight through the glass. I crept toward the front doors, heart pounding, and there it was, a massive silhouette just beyond the pool of light, standing in the fog at the far end of the lot. Its shape was wrong. Too tall, too narrow in the waist, shoulders sloping forward, head hunched as if sniffing the air. I stood frozen, my hand on the door handle, when the thing took a step. The crunch of gravel carried across the silence like a gunshot. Then another step, and another. It was walking toward me, deliberate and slow, the fog parting around its outline. When it reached the edge of the canopy lights, I finally saw details. The long, matted fur that clung to its body in dark strips, the curve of muscle beneath it, and eyes, reflective, burning faintly gold, locking straight onto me. They didn't blink. They didn't waver. They just fixed me in place like prey. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the counter, and the thing broke into a run. It moved with terrifying speed, claws scraping against the pavement, teeth flashing in the light as it barreled toward the doors. At the last second, it slammed against the glass, the impact rattling the frame. The entire building shook. I screamed, but the sound barely made it over the ringing in my ears. Up close, its breath fogged the glass. Hot, foul, unnatural. It pressed its snout against the pane, snarling, drool streaking down in thick ropes. For a moment, all I could do was stare, locked eye to eye with something that should not exist. Then, just as suddenly, it stepped back into the fog. The sound of claws against glass gave way to silence, then to the crunch of gravel retreating into the trees. By the time I dared move, the lot was empty again. The glass was cracked, smeared with saliva and mud, but intact. Somehow intact. I sank to the floor behind the counter, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I stayed there until dawn, the lights humming overhead, the fog pressing close, and the memory of those eyes seared into my mind. When the sun finally rose, I unlocked the doors and stepped outside with shaking hands. The morning air was cold, but it wasn't the weather that made me tremble. The light revealed everything I had tried to convince myself I hadn't really seen. The front windows bore the evidence plain as day. Smears of saliva streaked across the cracked glass, thick enough to glisten in the light. The pane that had bowed under the impact was still intact, but one push harder and it would have given way. I ran my fingertips across the surface. The glass felt brittle, spiderwebbed with fine fractures. It hadn't been a dream. On the pavement beneath the canopy, I found prints. Not boot prints, not paw prints, something in between. Each impression was deep, the gravel pressed flat under enormous weight. The front pads looked canine, claw tips gouging into the stone, but the spacing was wrong. These weren't the clustered steps of a four-legged animal. The stride was long, upright, bipedal. Some tracks were over 4 feet apart. Closer to the tree line, I found drag marks. Something heavy had raked across the ground. Claws, maybe, trailing lines through the frost. Near them lay a piece of trash from the night before, an empty chip bag that had been torn open, shredded into strips. It was such a small thing, but it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. This wasn't random aggression. It was toying with me, testing me. I tried to tell myself it was all explainable. A bear, maybe, crazed by hunger. A prank by some night drifters. But no matter how I twisted it, none of it added up. No bear walks upright for that long. No prankster carries scaffolding stilts tall enough to leave prints like those. And nothing human could slam against reinforced glass with that kind of force and not break it. When the morning shift arrived, I didn't say much. Just mumbled something about vandals and pointed to the glass. The day clerk gave me a skeptical look, but I didn't care. I grabbed my coat, walked out to my truck, and sat there for nearly 20 minutes before I could turn the key. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every glance in the rearview mirror made my stomach twist. The mist still clung to the trees along the road, and I kept thinking I saw something move just beyond the guardrails. For the rest of that day, I stayed awake, nerves on fire, replaying the moment it slammed against the glass. The teeth, the eyes, the deliberate intelligence behind its movements. Sleep wouldn't come, no matter how exhausted I was. Every sound outside my apartment, the creak of the building settling, the rumble of a passing car, made me jolt upright, convinced it had found me again. I went back to work the next night, but the gas station no longer felt the same. The neon buzz, the smell of burnt coffee, the hum of the coolers, they no longer grounded me. Instead, they only reminded me of that moment when all those thin barriers of glass and steel almost gave way to something that should not exist. And I knew, in my bones, it wasn't finished with me. In the days that followed, I tried to put it out of my head. I told myself it was exhaustion, night shift paranoia, maybe even a waking dream. But the evidence was still there. The gouges in the siding, the scratches on the glass. I wasn't the only one who had seen it, even if no one wanted to admit it out loud. When I asked around discreetly, a few people in town looked at me too long before answering. One older man, a regular who always bought his paper and cigarettes at 6 a.m. sharp, muttered something under his breath when I mentioned strange noises at the station. I pressed him, and he finally said, "Don't poke it, son. Not if you want to sleep again." Then he left without another word. Nights at the station were never the same. Every flicker of the fluorescent bulbs felt like a warning. Every gust rattling the window panes made my stomach knot. Sometimes, at 3 or 4 in the morning, I'd catch the faintest scrape along the back wall. Other times, I'd swear I saw a shape standing across the road in the fog, too still, too tall, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. By the time I blinked, it would be gone. I quit that job not long after. Some folks said it was burnout, others said I couldn't hack the hours. I let them think that. The truth was simpler. The dark had approached me too closely, and I was starting to wonder if the glass between me and it was ever enough. I don't tell this story to scare people, though maybe it should. I tell it because if you ever find yourself working the night shift, sitting under humming lights with the dark pressing against the glass, don't assume you're alone. Some things move when no one's supposed to be looking. And if they see you, they don't always look away. End of report.
This report submitted by the Fogwood Files, another account pulled from the fog reserved in the records. If you'd like the next story to find its way to you, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll be here when the next fire is lit. Until then, stay close to the firelight, because in the woods, you're never truly alone, and something is always waiting just beyond the glow.